Good evening. My name is Karen Coney. I'm the director of the Willis Center for Art and Politics, and I'm really delighted to present to you another one of the Public Art Fund's fantastic lectures with artists tonight with Willis Thomas. I thought tonight I would do something which I usually don't do, which is start by mentioning our own programs, those of the Willis Center. So let me begin that tomorrow night we have an opening just down the block of an exhibition called Abu Nadara, The Right to the Image. It is an exhibition, a film installation featuring about, over the course of 3 weeks, 60 very short video clips that show individuals in Syria expressing their thoughts of the day, responses to the situation in Syria, and what they experience every day in their daily lives. The exhibition and many more videos that are available online are the work of Abu Nadara, which is an anonymous collective of filmmakers based in Syria, who produces this work in order to advance the legal concept of the right to the image, the right of individual persons to have their own image and be represented by an image in dignity. Like the people in Syria and the artist collective, I think it's fair to say that our artist tonight, Willis Thomas, is a person, an individual, who features persons and individuals in his work in various different ways. One who is deeply invested in questions of representation and self-representation, and so you can imagine how delighted I am about this coincidence or this very natural link between the programs of the Public Art Fund and the programs here happening at the New School, specifically the exhibition opening 24 or 23 hours from now, just down the block. There's more information about Abu Nadara, the right to the image, but without further ado, and the information, is outside, I do now would welcome to the stage Andrea Hickey, who will introduce Willis Thomas, the person. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, Karen. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight on an extremely sunny summer fall evening. It's great to see so many faces. As Karen mentioned, I'm Andrea Hickey. I'm the curator at the Public Art Fund. And I want to first start off by extending our thanks to Karen and Pam Tillis and the team here at the New School who host us 3 times a semester where we present our annual PAF talks. The Public Art Fund Talk series showcases some of the most dynamic and innovative artists engaging with issues of public practice each semester. We host 3 talks per semester, and here, through the series, we try to show the ways in which public art challenges our expectations of public space and takes on new forms and ways of engaging with our urban environment. This semester, our talk series is titled Public Context, Private Meaning, and showcases artists whose work considers how personal experiences with artworks intersect with their broader social and cultural contexts. Last month, we heard a very engaging and unusual lecture from Yepa Hine, for those of you who might have seen it. And on November 18th, we'll hear from British artist Fiona Banner. So mark your calendars if you'd like to come back to see this lecture. So tonight I have the honor of introducing Willis Thomas as the second artist in this series. And as Karen mentioned, Hank is first and foremost a person, but he's also a friend and a collaborator and somebody who's been in my sphere of reference in art in New York since I moved here 5 years ago. We've gotten to know each other very well over this time, and it's been wonderful this past year to see his work in 2 different exhibitions that we actually have on view here in New York. I hope you've all had a chance to see Hank's solo exhibition, which is called The Truth Is I See You, which is on view at Metrotech Commons in downtown Brooklyn, just above the J Street Metrotech subway stop. If you go upstairs, you can see his exhibition. the piece uses the visual language of speech bubbles to, Hank is telling me, I really want to talk for a long time, so you have to be quick. I won't go into too much detail. He's going to tell you all about his shows, but he's also in a wonderful exhibition we have at City Hall Park called Image Objects, which is very much about a different angle in looking at his practice, which is the relationship between digital imaging technology and sculpture today. And Hank will also talk about that piece. So I won't talk too much longer. Hank, please join us. Everybody, please welcome Hank Willis Thomas.
She's an academic. She's very professional. I am not at all. So we have this tug of war constantly. And to pay tribute to that, I'm going to change my talk at the last minute yet again. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Public Art Fund. And thank all of you guys for coming. Ignore me while I delete like a bunch of slides. But I'm doing that because I realize that, like, for me, when I do talks, which are relatively frequently, I don't like to sound scripted, and I don't like to be scripted. I like to surprise myself. So I hope you're in for a pleasant surprise. But as an artist, I find it's important to always have a healthy relationship with failure. I think so often in society we're afraid to fail, and we think that failure is something that we should avoid. But I think in a fine art practice, that can be the thing that actually saves it. What am I doing? I'm also not used to people seeing my desktop. What am I doing? I'm doing a talk. First slide.
It seems to me that the artist struggle for his integrity must be considered as a metaphor for the struggle which is universal and daily of all human beings on the face of this terrifying globe to get to become human beings. What we might get at this evening, if we are lucky, if the mic doesn't fail, my voice holds out, if you ask me questions, is what the importance of this effort is.
Now, when you were starting out as a writer, you were a black, impoverished homosexual. You must have said to yourself, gee, how disadvantaged can I get?
Oh, no, I thought I hit the jackpot.
Oh, great.
It was so outrageous you could not go any further, you know. So you had to find a way to use it.
James Baldwin, who are you?
First of all, I'm speaking as an American citizen. I'm speaking also as the grandson of a slave.
My mother was born in Maryland, my father was born in New Orleans, I was born in New York.
Someone who represents a very complex country which insists on being simple-minded.
So that is just an excerpt of a 5-channel video installation that I did last year called "A Person is More Important Than Anything Else," which uses various archival footage and audio footage of James Baldwin mixed in with contemporary footage to talk about this very, very simple concept that we way too often forget in our society. And I think one of my favorite lines in this clip was where he says, "Come from a very complex place that insists on being simple-minded." I think about all the ways that we talk about ourselves and label ourselves in these systems and ideas that are often not helpful. They're binary, black and white. And when I think about that, I often come back to my own relationship to black and white, which is the day I discovered I was colored. Each of us has a moment in our lives when we realize that we are not like everybody else. And I was going to ask everyone to take 1 minute, look at the person next to you, or Yeshua, the person behind you. The person behind you. No, that guy to the left. Everyone find somebody to talk to. I'm going to ask you to talk to the person next to you for 1 minute about the moment you realized that you were gay, straight, white, black, Latino, South Asian, spoke with a funny voice, too short, too tall. You guys ready? All right, does everyone have a buddy? I don't think you have a buddy, Afropunk. Come up here. She's good, Elliot, talk to her. 1 minute. All right, wait. How's everybody doing? Raise your hand if you need another minute. All right, 1 more minute. Yeah, Thomas, talk to that lady next to you. She's not talking to somebody. So, thank you guys for participating in that. I realized that I missed out on my chance to hear what people said, but did everyone have a story to tell? And I think that's the most important thing, that each of us has a story to tell, and I don't think anybody's story is more important than anyone else's. It's really how we tell our stories that matter, and if we can figure out how to use our voices to make people listen. And I'm often fascinated with the different devices people use to do that. And I think about that in my work. There's one person who I think does it better than anyone else, and that's this person. I did this piece a few years ago with my friend Will called Black Righteous Space. And it really came out of listening to this clip. And so what you're going to see is him speak.
And I come here tonight and plead with you. Believe in yourself and believe that you're somebody. And as I said to a group last night, nobody else can do this for us. No document can do this for us. No Lincolnian Emancipation Proclamation can do this for us. No Kennysonian or Johnsonian Civil Rights Bill can do this for us. If the Negro is to be free, he must move down into the inner resources of his own soul and sign with a pen and ink of self-assertive manhood his own Emancipation Proclamation. Don't let anybody take your manhood. Be proud of our heritage. As somebody said earlier tonight, we don't have anything to be ashamed of. Somebody told a lie one day. They couched it in language. They made everything black, ugly, and evil. Look in your dictionary and see the synonyms of the word black. There's always something degrading and low and sinister. Look at the word white. It's always something pure, high, and clean. But I want to get the language right tonight. I want to get the language so right that everybody here will cry out, yes, I'm black, I'm proud of it, I'm black and beautiful.
So I saw that clip and I was overwhelmed that 50 years ago someone was so very articulately and so explicitly dissecting the problematics with binary systems of relating to ourselves and one another, but also finding new ways to turn that on its head. And what I noticed most when he spoke were the pauses. And so I worked with my friend Will to make this piece we call Black Righteous Space, where we used a series of speeches, songs that come out of this African-American, Afro-Caribbean oratory and musical science, which keeps you waiting on every word, and is both dignified. It has a sense of morality that is hard to place, but we know it when we hear it, and a sense of humanness. And I would love it, actually, because when in the installation there's somebody to actually, there's a microphone and there's these blank spaces where people talk. So what's happening now is you see the symbol that's now having been very contentious, and I've changed the colors to the colors of the Negro Liberation Movement. But when I speak, I alter that into many things. And so I was wondering, does anybody, you notice there's a piano here, does anybody here play the piano? Only one person? Really? 2 people? 3, 4? Okay, since you put your hands up first, could you come play some piano with us for this piece? What's your name? What's your name? Can you speak in the microphone?
Chris.
All right, can you play a little ditty for us? Thank you. Maybe turn the lights down. Play harder. Will you play softer? You notice how nothing happens when he uses his voice softly. And then you raise it. So anyway, I could listen to that for a while. Thank you. But look at you guys. Wait, don't go anywhere. But I really feel like that's a metaphor for why we speak, because the things that we are so fixed in our minds or fixed in our society can be altered by our ability to use our voices to see, to change the way that we see the world. That's basically, what I'm into. I usually don't know what I'm doing, and I think that's part of the fun of it. I see one of my professors from college, Lori Novak, in the room. I don't know if anybody else is here. I went to NYU, and I had the privilege of having so many wonderful people nurture me, but no one more than this person on the right, which is my mom, Deborah Willis, who is a photographer, art historian, and I went to NYU because my mom kind of forced me to study photography, and then 3 years after I graduated, Lori, who was the chair, hired my mother. So I always like to say I paved the way for her. But this is a piece that we did together in 2009 called Sometimes I See Myself in You. Oh, hey, you mind playing some piano while I figure it'd be fun to have some impromptu musical accompaniment while I'm talking. I haven't seen it before. But yeah, I used to be Deb's son, and now she's Hank's mom. That's all I wanted to say about that. But as I walk through the streets of New York, I see so much. Where average person sees on a few thousand ads in every day. And the beauty of the Public Art Fund is it gives us an opportunity to be in the public space and see images and objects that aren't really about commerce, that it's about actually having a new relationship to the world and ourselves. Because so many of the images that I see are really a form of social conditioning and brainwashing. That's how I see ads. This is an ad that I saw and I didn't know what to do with. I didn't know how to locate myself or anyone in it. I've always been interested in the power of ads to tell stories, to shape the world, our notions of the world, and who belongs where, and how people can be depicted in what way. Hey, Brooksy. That's my cousin back there. She has a bag that I saw someone else there. It says, ads imitate art, imitates life, imitates ads. That's the vicious cycle I think we live in there. We see these images that are produced by our society and try to imitate them in our lives. But most of them actually are inspired by art historical references. And I'm so interested in that cycle. But images like this, which I struggle with wondering where people's humanity is and what the intentions are in them. Or images like this. But like, for instance, where did this image come from? How many people know the relationship to this person in that image? How many people know who this person is? No one in the room knows who this person is, except for my fiance, who likes to be right. This person was the most famous, arguably the most famous African-American person of his generation, and definitely one of the wealthiest. And no one 100 years later even knows who he is. How shocking is that? He was celebrated actually for his performance of blackness, his extraordinary performance of blackness. And I'm fascinated with the way in which he performed blackness off stage and the way he was paid to perform blackness in America. And I think it's fascinating because blackness is an American fantasy, that there is this status quo that we have lived with for so long about who belonged where and was supposed to do what, but then also these kind of amazing flips of the switches that happen that change our notion of what things are supposed to be. And I'm hoping that soon we'll see even new flips, as we actually see almost every day in the 21st century, which no one could have imagined. But I think about the 20th century, because that's when I was born, and I think about the images that society was creating, the history that was happening, but I also think about, this is the era where logos became hieroglyphs. And I'm interested in how I could use the language of advertising to talk about things that advertising couldn't responsibly talk about. So I think about branding in my work and how slaves were branded as a sign of ownership, and how today we brand ourselves, and even how the notion of blackness. I find it amazing that in a society, like in a world that is neither more black or white, we talk about everything in this binary where most of the people in the world are Asian, and they range in complexion from as dark as I am to lighter than anyone else in this room. And it's this binary kind of ignores so much. But when it comes to blackness in American context, I think race is the most successful advertising campaign of all time. That you could take people from a continent which is arguably the most ethnically, geographically, culturally, linguistically diverse, package people up in ships and send them halfway across the world and tell them they're all the same for a commercial interest. To me, that's absolute power. And so I try to deal with these things and talk about these ideas in my work, my branded consciousness that I live in with my Apple and iPhone and in all the ways in which advertising and branding shape my world, but also how certain bodies might have been treated at a certain period in time, and how the spectacles that of one generation become slightly altered spectacles in a new generation, where we see this relationship in college sports, which everyone's talking about and looking at every other night this time of the year, where it's a multi-billion-dollar industry fueled off of the free labor of the descendants of slaves and indentured servants and sharecroppers. And so I'm always thinking of new ways that I can approach the things that I see, the way, and reshape my own notion of how I see the world. I used to want to be like my cousin Sanga, who was one of the most amazing athletes I'd ever seen, until he broke his thumb his senior year in college and was being recruited by Georgetown and UVA and all these schools. And then soon after, he broke his ankle. And there went almost all of our dreams about who we can be and how we can succeed, because as a young African-American male, most of the ways that we were taught that we could succeed, especially in the 80s, was through sports and entertainment. And I struggled with that and wanted to start to illustrate that in my work. And Sanga wanted to be a rock star, which was ironic. He didn't even like basketball. And when he was on his pursuit to play music that he didn't think black kids were allowed to play, he was murdered in Philadelphia. And I had this really challenging experience with my family because he was my closest friend. We were roommates at the time. We lived on 2nd Street in B. Shared one bed, shared underwear, shared everything. Not girlfriends. But we were in the funeral home, and we had I didn't know there was so much pomp and circumstance where there's this, you have to buy a new suit and a new casket, and he was killed because he was with these guys who were robbed for their gold chains. He wasn't even wearing it. But there's this thing where there's the $5,000 casket and the $7,000 casket, and there's this unspoken message that if you buy the more expensive box of wood that's going to be thrown in the dirt, never to be seen again, you loved him more. And if you couldn't afford that one, that maybe you couldn't afford to love him enough. And so that was this impossible decision for me to watch my family members make. And I was thinking about the MasterCard Priceless campaign, and this is one of those stories that isn't in those ads, that even in mourning we're still being marketed to, because we're still made to feel like we're not enough. And so I was able to talk about that in galleries and in certain ways, but I wanted to put it out into the public. And I was able to do that at Yerba Buena Center for the Art, and it was the first time that I was able, it set me on this path, I hope, because I was heavily mourning, and I wanted to figure out how to talk about my cousin's story, but to make it something that it's happened every day in the United States. And how do we talk about it on a much larger level? And so I was able to put it outside this museum in San Francisco, and only when we went to Birmingham, Alabama, was there actually a real impactful
Melanie
response.
Posey takes a look at it. She joins us live from the museum tonight. Melanie?
Well, Janet and Devin, here is the picture that we're talking about. You can see the MasterCard logo and you see the MasterCard slogan, so you think it's a MasterCard ad, right? Wrong. What it is doing is creating a lot of dialogue, and those here at the museum say that is exactly what it was designed to do. The picture hangs boldly on the back of the Birmingham Museum of Art, an African-American family grieving at a funeral. The caption, a spinoff of the MasterCard advertising campaign. 3-piece suit, $250. Gold chain, $400. 9mm pistol, $79. Bullet, 60 cents. Picking the perfect casket for your son, priceless. To the unknowing eye, it brings a strong response.
Yeah, that's offensive to me too, because it seems like it's stereotypical that people are just tagging the black community with the things that we use, the things that we buy, things that we flaunt.
And I'm not black, but I would think that it would be offensive to black people.
I think when someone walks off the street, they're wondering, is it an ad? If not, why is it up here? What is it? What's the point? Why does MasterCard have their name on it?
This is not an ad. It's contemporary art on display at the Birmingham Museum of Art. The artist, a young black man by the name of Willis Thomas. The picture taken at his own cousin's funeral after he was killed during a robbery.
He wanted to get at the grief his family was feeling and the frustration with this sort of cycle of violence that's sort of afflicting the country. I think he's using the term priceless here, not in a satiric way, but to suggest that life is the most priceless thing of all.
Willis relies on artistic license to play off of the MasterCard logo, a key he uses knowing how much Americans connect with advertising. After learning what it's all about, Jennifer Swenson's response turned from offense to grief and eventually hope.
I guess the artist had a choice. He could have picked up a gun and he could have sought revenge. And what this artist chose to do was to make a statement, even though it's offensive to some people, if it changed one person's thought process in life, then it would be worth it.
Now, because of the response to this picture, the museum has put up this explanation. However, as you can see, it is rather small in comparison to the picture. Some people may miss it, so they plan to add a much larger placard later. Also, the curator says the reason this piece is outside is because it was too large to fit inside the
I don't know if I could have asked for a better response. I mean, it literally, that little Fox News summary says pretty much everything that I was thinking. It really says a lot about who has the right to talk about what, even who has the right to be offended. Like, I'm not black, but I can see how it could be offensive to the other team. Like, it's not an ad, so you shouldn't be offended. It's art, and it's made by a young black man, so it couldn't be racist. And it's a picture taken at his own cousin's funeral, so it couldn't be insensitive. Like, there's all of these kind of licenses that we grant people rather about what makes it okay to say and do what. It's because we don't necessarily always value ourselves and each other as actually having something important, being able to align ourselves with people who we don't think we have anything in common with, which is no one, actually, because we all have something in common, that we're humans. And so I was really most amazed by that last line because it's so unique to the United States. Again, this binary where the artist had a choice. He could have picked up a gun and killed someone or made art. And I'm like, I think I made the right decision. I find images like that and stories like that fascinating because the logic and why people responded that way, the fact that the African-American community was offended when they saw this image was because they read it not as a family grieving, they read it as a black family grieving. Every time we see a brown, my skin is brown, by the way, it's important for us to notice that. But every time we see a black person in an image, that's supposed to speak to all black people, right? And on just 2 blocks from here, literally 2 blocks from here, I saw this ad on a bus stop. And around the same time I had made that piece and that video was up. And it was a group of multi-ethnic teenagers from Humanities High School, I assume, standing by the bus stop. And I was shocked because I was like, how do those teenagers, how are they reading this ad? Because I find it problematic, you know. We have this guy and he says, I am what I am, and he's a criminal, I guess. Anybody recognize this guy, this criminal? Who is he? 50 Cent. What does he do? You sure he's not a criminal? Because that's what he says he is. It is an actual ad. What's it an ad for? Why are you guys talking so low? You got a guy playing piano. What? Sneakers. Where are the sneakers? Wait, Reebok. Where does it say Reebok? It says, somebody says, see Reebok there? R-E-K. That does not spell Reebok. But we have now gotten to the point in our society where we can see 3 letters and a symbol and jump to sneakers and actually read words that aren't there. That's how much we've been indoctrinated into the system of commerce, but also what's really for sale here. What's for sale is this notion of this person as a criminal. That's how you sell the shoes, I guess, even though he's wearing a G Unit, which was his brand's clothing. And I thought maybe I'm being oversensitive. Let me see what else they're putting out there. And so I went online. I saw this one that was up, and you know, it was Andy Ruddock, and he just happened to be a champion. He feels bad about it, which is the white man's burden. Then there was Lucy Liu, who was, I guess, supposed to speak to every kind of woman. She's like kind of not white, kind of not white-ish all. And then there's Yao Ming, who's a monkey on a basketball. and then Allen Iverson was the devil, and then Jay-Z says, I got my MBA from Marcy Projects, and I guess he's got the rubber bands, he's talking about being a drug dealer. And I was like, I found it fascinating that African-American men are 5% of the population, but represented 3 times in this first element of the campaign. And you have the one that's the criminal, and then you have the one white guy who's a champion, and then you have the Asian American woman who's like this docile, innocent kind of little child, and then you have the Chinese giant who's they clearly don't know what to do with, and then the other African American guy, black guy, is the devil, and the other one is a drug dealer. Like, I am what I am. This is how you sell shoes in America. I was shocked, and I was shocked when I came across this ad, which was an ad for a 2001 Toyota RAV4. And I looked at it for a long time, and I couldn't figure out. I was like, someone's like, you should do something with this. And I was like, I don't know what to do with this. And the last thing after like 4 years of staring at it, all I could think to do was this. And I realized the last thing you'd think this was an ad for is Japanese cars. And I started realizing how when you're marketing to a demographic, there's all kinds of generalizations that people press onto the demographic, but when you look at it unbranded, as I put it, you start to see other things you start to see what's really for sale. And what's for sale is really how people are packaged. And that shifts over time. There was a period when African Americans were depicted only as servants. And in the 60s, as a result of the civil rights and the Black Power movement, you started to see these shifts. And this is an ad from 1969 that I found fascinating. What do you guys think this is an ad for? Shoes? Pants? Good. It says, Slack Power, the anti-establishment post-grad slacks by his. And you can't really read this. Our post-grad slacks have soul and a mighty medley of stripes, plaids, and solids. But it was amazing that as early as 1969, white men on Madison Avenue had figured out how to use the language of the Black Power movement to sell what looked like golf pants to me to the educated revolutionary. There's this kind of amazing way in which the ads can tell us kind of what's happening, but also tell us different stories that we're not necessarily paying attention to. How many people, hey Lydia, this is my art history professor who kind of helped me think about these things, made me read Roland Barthes. I don't know why. But back to this, you can turn the lights back down. But who is this? Joe Frazier. What's this an ad for? Aunt Jemima, what else? Bluebonnet margarine. And it's amazing because most of us, as soon as we see this image, we read a totally different thing in it. I totally saw this unbranded as a reference to a domestic servant, which is what Aunt Jemima was. And it's fascinating to take Joe Frazier, who was a heavyweight boxing champion, one of the few symbols of black masculine prowess in society, and make him in any way a relationship to a slave mammy. But I'm fascinated with ads because one person can be held accountable. We are responsible for them. They are a reflection of society's hopes and dreams at a given period of time. This was one I found from 2005 in Ebony magazine. Did anybody want to guess what this is an ad for? Ice cream? Watermelon, Ebony magazine. Does that help? No? Well, this is actually an ad for kitty litter. And you might ask yourself, how did this ad for kitty litter with watermelon find itself in Ebony magazine? And you can almost imagine the person in the boardroom being like, how do we get black people to buy our kitty litter? Well, black people like watermelon. What if all the seeds were in one place and we could just scoop them away, just like our kitty litter? And you could I like to believe that it was a black art director in a room of like all white people, and he's like, I'm black, I like watermelon, and everyone else was like, oh, okay, it's not racist. Because there is this way of us not being able to call things out if we don't feel like we're part of that club. And images in ads are fascinating to me because they really are a reflection of a society, where we were. This is an ad from 1977 that literally couldn't have existed in 1967, where you have a black man and a white man sitting at the same lunch counter. and the white man's looking longingly at his dark meat. Each of these ads have a new story to tell and a change, and show a change. And thinking about this image, which is really about the best way to have a cigarette in 1987, where you sit in front of the fan, let the smoke rise, and just blow back into your face. Or this one, which is, I know everyone knows what this is an ad for, right? And how crazy is it that we can just see one small red symbol in an ad and we know exactly what it's for? But this is a moment when African Americans were moving into the middle class, and these people just quote unquote happen to be black. It's not about them being black, but I see where race isn't a factor. You see gender roles fall into play. You see the women watch as the men play, and then you see this woman feeding this guy on this burger, but if you look at his right hand, he's got his own burger down there. So you can almost imagine the photographer being like, oh, you need something to do, feed him. And and I'm fascinated with these stories that are like latent in these images. This is an ad for Chevy. It was Black History Month, that helps explain it. And they're like, once upon a time in America, there were people who were proud and strong, and I had two rules for appropriating in this series. I was like, I can't use any pictures that I wish I took, and I can't sell any pictures that I know the name of the photographer. And this one was like, I really wish I took this photograph. It's got like the African chief griot and the soldier and the jazz musician, hey, and the civil rights activist and the college graduate. And I was like, I really kind of wish I took this. And I was looking at it, I was like, wait a minute, somebody's missing in this timeline of American history. Like, you couldn't sell the heartbeat of America with a picture of a beat up bloody slave in the middle of it. So in the corporate retelling and celebration of Black History Month, that you kind of forget the main part of not only how black people got here, but how America got here. And that's, to me, fascinating. And I'm always looking at new ways. And so I presented this at the Rubel Family Collection as a series of artworks. So ads became art. And in this new kind of way of looking at them, you can look deeper and think deeper about the images. And I showed them in a series of 82, going from 1968 to 2008. And more recently, I started looking at other images, and like those images that I avoided first, where you saw African Americans and these positions, and thinking about this image from 1915, where most black people in the United States didn't have the right to vote at all. And this was the position that they were expected to be in. But also realizing that most women in the United States didn't have the right to vote in 1915. And how, when I look at this image, I wonder where the power structure actually was. You know, he technically was empowered to vote, but everything was done to make sure he didn't, and she didn't have that right at all. But they didn't actually see themselves as allies. And this is the same year that that's just 100 years ago, and the movie, The Birth of a Nation came out. And I was looking around at what was happening, and I realized this is the height of the women's suffrage movement. And the images that were being put out, the propaganda that was being put out, the ads that were being put out to encourage women not to vote because of how they might be treated if they chose to use their voices, and realized the connection between what was happening to African Americans, all African Americans, when they were trying to get the right to vote. And I realized that there was some kind of interesting conversation that, like, when you try to raise your voice, this is a democracy which is afraid of giving people the right to vote. And we're constantly divided around these things, these stupid conversations about the white vote, the black vote, the female. Like, can you have a white vote and a female vote? Does that really make any sense? Or a Jewish vote and a white vote? Like, what are the conversations? As if you can, what if people are multi-ethnic? Are they the black vote or the white vote? Does everyone in Argentina vote the same way that people from Mexico and Honduras vote? These ways in which that we talk about people in these very simplistic ways are really a reflection of our fear of what happens when they get equal rights. We think that when they get equal rights, they're going to all of a sudden treat us the way that we proverbially were treating them. And I wanted to think about that and inspect that. And so I started a series, a project with Jack Shaman, who's over there. Jack, raise your hand. higher. Jack is a really good friend, and he's my gallerist, and I want to do a show called Unbranded, A Century of White Women. And I wanted to kind of inspect and investigate the corporate representation and creation of the white female demographic, because we also forget that most people who are considered white today would not have been considered white 100 years ago. Like Irish people, Jewish people, Spanish people, Russian people, Italian people, white people. And whiteness is like this blob that people move into. And part of the reason they move into it is because they don't have to have responsibility of being seen and relating to people as human beings. And this huge immigration wave brought in all of these people who were second-class citizens, who were almost implicitly first-class citizens the moment they landed, but not the women. And I wanted to track that in this corporate ads. He's just playing so beautifully. I get caught off guard. Yeah. So I wanted to inspect that, and looking at images like this from the 1950s when women finally started to move into the workplace, and the idea of how life would be hard for them in the workplace, or this image for Maidenform bras where she says, "I dreamt I won the election in my Maidenform bra." So, which someone pointed out during the exhibition that this would be actually the worst possible thing that could happen to you on election day. But this was a selling point, right? Or images like this one from 1956. So I took one ad for every year from 1915 to 2015 and removed all the advertising information. So we're looking at these ads undressed. And this one is amazing because, and it took a quote unquote white person to point this out to me. What's wrong with this picture? Well, first of all, where's Egypt? Where? Are we sure? All right. Because if you look at the person on the top right, his face, and look at the hand that's coming out of that casket, there is a clear denial of reality. Denial is in Africa, as you know, a river in Africa. And in their celebration of Black beauty, they have totally anglicized it. And it's amazing even in movies like Exodus, it just came out today, this year, where we know that ancient Egyptians and contemporary Egyptians range in complexion from the whole gamut. But we know one thing for sure is that they were not Anglo-Saxon. But in every story that we're told about Africa, there are Anglo-Saxon protagonists. How does that work? And it's because of images like this. Because we get conditioned over time to seeing things like this that were normal. At the same time that this image was created for these corsets, the same year is when Emmett Till was killed for whistling at a white woman. So who was actually besmirching whose character? Wait, what's the word? Sullying. But then there's images like this from 1960. And what I realized is as more and more women and more African Americans were trying to find new opportunities, the violence that was actually taking place against African Americans in the real world was actually being acted out psychologically on quote unquote white women in the media. And this is an ad from 1960. What do you guys think this is an ad for? It's for the sweaters. And it says, clearly the message, men are better than women. Indoors, women are useful, even pleasant, but on a mountain, they're somewhat of a drag. So don't go hauling her up the side of a mountain to show off your new Drummond sweater. And it's really about, when you look at it, they're contemplating whether or not they should save her or let her go. That was the precarious situation that all women were in when they were asking for equality. And the images got more and more violent. And I was fascinated and struck by how overt the violence was and how crazy it got until 1968 when we started to find new images, when more and more women got into the workplace, got into the offices and started telling new stories and forcing the media to tell new stories and then even newer stories. But that's what I'm interested in, equality. And I'm interested in the blurred lines and how when you're looking at things from one way, they're blurry, and then from another angle, they're clear. And the hybridity that exists within all of us, that you can't see who I am by looking at the color of my skin, because I am a rainbow. as an African American, I'm often asked where I come from, and I say Africa, America. It's a place to call home. I'm thinking about work where when I move around it, it forces me to see things differently. But most importantly, I asked Andrea to remind me that I'm a person. And I'm inspired by this image from Ernest Withers taken in 1968 at the Memphis Sanitation Workers March, where it was necessary. I found it crazy when I made this piece in 2009 that people, just 8 years before I was born, needed to stand collectively and affirm their humanity, holding signs saying, "I am a man." Because this phrase I grew up with wasn't "I am a man," it was "I am the man." And I was fascinated about how it went from this collective statement during segregation to this very me, selfish statement after integration. And I wanted to remix that and rethink that. And so I wrote it, I made the series of paintings. I like to read the last line as a poem where it says, "I'm the man, who's the man, you the man, what a man, I am man, I'm human, I am many, I am a man." Because rather than trying to validate myself on anyone else's standard of what's important, what's valuable, the greatest gift that any of us has ever given is our consciousness. And that's something that literally can never be taken away from us. Because even as we move on, if we leave that impression, our consciousness continues to move on. And thinking about I am somebody. Do you guys know I Am Somebody? Jesse Jackson's famous speech. It was so corny when I remember hearing it after realizing I am somebody, but he was actually making an important point. And this was a political pin, a button that I thought was corny because who wears buttons anymore? Anybody in here wearing buttons? Sorry. 3 or 4 people. Love you. So I wanted to take this kitsch thing and put it in a new context and started making these pins using statements like the I am the greatest. Who's the greatest? Who's the greatest? Isn't it fascinating that someone born in the segregated South of very little means was able at the young age of 22 tell us that he's the greatest? Not the greatest boxer, the greatest of all times. And even as we watch his body deteriorate, he maintains being the greatest. And that's such an audacious statement. I wanted to make this audacious reference to this audacious statement. And I wanted to think about how I could use these kitsch objects, these political pins, and put them in the context and the discourse with fine art, and how political discourse and protest discourse is often detached from that. And so I've been making images in the past year, which are about protests and about putting ourselves in the places of the people who we overlook and we forget, and wanting to make sculptures that actually almost take me to that moment. Like moments like this when someone put his arm through a police van in apartheid South Africa, not knowing who's on the other side, but knowing whoever it was wished them no goodwill. But wanting to send a message to their people, all of their people, which include us, to stay strong and be defiant in spite of all adversity. And so I wanted to step into that. And so I made this sculpture called a Mandala, where all of a sudden we have this kind of almost surreal relationship to this surreal moment. And we rarely ever get a chance to walk into a historical moment. And I've been trying to find new ways to make almost like a phenomenological relationship to that with the sculptures I've been producing that are about protests and about collective movement towards change, or also collective experiences of oppression, where the images like this one, taken by Ernest Cole in apartheid South Africa in the 1960s, of miners being strip searched, I always felt guilty looking at this image because I constantly caught myself gawking at their butts. And I wondered, is there a responsible way to show this image again? And so I wanted to make it as a sculpture, and I made it as a sculpture. I cropped it at their shoulders, and I retitled it Raise Up, not knowing just 6 months later that this sculpture would have a totally different meaning in the United States. And it says a lot about framing and context, about how something could be framed and reframed in one way and then tell a different story to other people at a different period of time. I'm thinking about that as we think about the children and the adults in Syria and in places not far from Auschwitz, having experience that we thought should never happen again. And they're looking at their hands on barbed wire, and when I cropped it, all of a sudden I realized this wasn't necessarily about what happened 70 years ago. It was actually about what's happening now, what's happening all over the world. And how can I, as an artist, speak to that? Or the moments of transcendence in 1989, when people broke barriers and wanting to make work again that I can walk around and that I can meditate on that moment. But also think about sports not only as a form of social conditioning, but as a form of expression that's liberating, about how it can be a metaphor for overcoming all of the things that the world has stacked up against us at any moment in time. And this image of the Harlem Globetrotter standing in front of the Statue of Liberty inspired me to make this sculpture that's now a part of this current exhibition, Image Objects, at the City Hall Park. And I love the idea of being able to make a reference to the perseverance and the beauty of I'm not even gonna say anything. I'm gonna just go through a few of these slides. But I'm thinking about how can I talk, because the beauty of Black men, really, to be able to actually redefine ourselves in certain ways, and thinking about how that functions in ways that need to happen, especially at this time when so many of us, although we're all diverse, are dumbed down and summed up into very simple ways. I'm always also, so in projects like Question Bridge, which I'm going to have to talk about more later, which is a video installation that I've been doing with a number of friends, and just released a book, which I hope you guys get with Aperture, Question Bridge Black Males. But lastly, I just want to talk about the Truth Booth. All of these projects that I've been doing also that are like Question Bridge and like the Truth Booth are really about elevating the voices of everyday people. So my collaborators, Jim and Ryan, are actually traveling the world with me and asking people to walk into this booth, which many of you guys saw clips from when we came in. This is it in Bamiyan, Afghanistan. And asking them to tell their stories and tell the truth from their perspective, and encouraging us to listen. And so I wanted to show you a few clips of it, and this is, you can see we've traveled to very important places.
The truth is not to be discovered because it was there before we were born. It hid itself when we were born, and it only comes out again once we are dead. I'm nearly dead, so the truth will shortly emerge.
I believe that the truth is the struggle to find what it really is.
The truth is really small. It's very hard to see. But if you look really, really close, you will find the truth. And it's all around. Thank you.
It is true that I have got a girlfriend that is named Rian. And it is true that my favorite animal is a dolphin, okay? And that's all I wanted to say.
The truth is, Molly, you're a bitch.
The truth is that I want to be an actor, a dancer, a singer, but I'm not sure how to get into the business. I've joined Trading Faces and, well, I've joined the agency of there, but I'm not sure if I'm going to get into I am in the agency, but I'm not sure if I'm going to get anything out of it. And I just really want to be an actress especially, or maybe a beautician, or a singer maybe, or maybe a dancer, but I'm not sure how to get in. That's the truth. This was an Accident Keen production. I want to say hello to Melody, because she's my little doggy, and all my other pets. And my parents. Peace out.
The truth, I believe, is Lego. Lego brings you think small, but believe big. Lego is in all our minds. So the truth is very, very small, but think big. Thank you. Thank you.
Those were all from Ireland a few years ago. But in New York, I just saw one of the clips that really shocked me.
The truth is, I've tried to end my life 5 times. And every time I don't succeed, I feel better about myself. And I've overcome it. And I don't wish I was dead anymore. And that's the truth. And I'm happy that I'm a bigger person now.
The truth.
So, I mean, to me, that was so courageous and so beautiful. And in New York, especially, when we did this project with Public Art Fund and we put it out in Metro Tech, we had all these amazing stories. People were so compelling and so real. And so the last thing I just wanted to show you is this installation that Andrea was going to talk about with these, you want to come and finish it? Speech bubbles that say stuff in different languages. Truth is I miss you, the truth is I am you, the truth is I know you. And then on the other side of it, it'll say the same phrase in German. And we have placards that teach you how to say that phrase in someone else's language. It's the 22 most spoken languages in Brooklyn. And I realized that even if we know how to learn how to say something poorly in someone else's language, we're actually bridging a gap. We're trying to acknowledge that we don't know it all, and that our own position is not the most important. And I love a work that's in public. So I'm thank you, Nicholas, and thank you, Andrea, for actually working every day to make sure that we can put things in the public that aren't just corporations trying to convince us to buy things. So we have these sculptures, these benches that people get to sit in and love in and play in and interact. And it's just such an exciting thing to make something so earnest in the public, where these trees that you walk around and it says the truth is I love you. Where do we see that? And that, you know, when else do I get to look cool? So at the end of the day, it's really just about hope. And that's what I hope that I brought to you guys tonight. And thank you, Chris, for playing along. And if you want to hear more of his music, go to chrisbowers.com. It's my ringer there. So does anyone have any questions to ask?
I think we have time for a few questions. We're running a little bit late, but everyone should take a microphone. Hank, that was so special and thoughtful, and you totally did it on the fly, and it was great.
Thanks. We met, he was playing somewhere last night, and I saw him playing with Kyle Abraham, because he's collaborating on a show that's opening on November 10th at the Joyce. And I was like, I want him to come with my talk and play. So Andrea found a piano. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I think there's one right here.
Hey, Hank, how's it going?
Hey.
So I have a question for you. The whole, all the pieces that you did on advertising, did you get into any kind of litigation about that?
Why would they ever want to talk about that?
I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking about like...
Literally, why would they ever want to talk about that?
Okay.
Because there's two things, and there's Bayate, one of my collaborators. Bayate and I were working on some of these projects, and when we were putting this show up at Yerba Buena, where we put the first priceless piece up, there was this kind of debate of like, oh, how long will it be up before they send us a cease and desist letter? And after it being up for a long period of time, one person pointed out, like, how else was MasterCard going to get their logo on the front of a major museum? And then I also realized that why else would they actually want to have a serious conversation about what they're doing? And the answer is definitely not. Jack even had like the CEO of Nike come in, the former CEO of Nike come in, and he was just, did he like it? He liked it. I don't know if he got it. He says that he studies the logo as public domain, and I do think we own them. They belong to us, and so they are a language. Advertising is the most ubiquitous language in the world, and we don't actually use our voices enough to speak back. I think that's what's so exciting with the memes and this current moment where like corporations actually kind of have to listen to us, and we are reshaping the stories we're being told. We still are seduced, but I think there's definitely new avenues. Anyone else? I did say a lot, so I'm overwhelmed. So, do you want to
I
ask?
have a question. Yeah.
Okay.
I think this idea of how we all get to be voices right now in the media with our use of social media. I know that's something you're very conscious of, and has definitely, I think, informed this whole exploration of sculpture and its relationship to photography. And even when we've been at Metro Tech, watching people interact with the work has been part of it. Do you how do you think about your practice as a whole in terms of highlighting how people can be more conscious of their own image making process? Because for me, I see, if we're not paying attention to the images we're also putting out there, then are we as much part of the problem?
Well, that's part of what I knew I wanted. When I saw Baite here, I realized, because him and I have collaborated on a number of public art projects. This is one of them. And we work with a group of people, and we like to call Cause Collective, and we like to put the public in art. And Truth Booth, Question Bridge, and this project, which is called Along the Way, is really about that. And we wanted to make a piece about diversity in the Bay Area. And Baite said one of the most thoughtful things I ever heard when he was like, we talk about diversity. He's like, just because people look different doesn't mean they're diverse. Because in the Bay Area, people might look all kinds of ways, but if you come with some right-wing Christian agenda, you are not welcome in most places. But also, we realize that just because people look similar doesn't mean that we're the same. And I think that is the real message that I really try to put across. Like, just because you see someone who allegedly looks like you in an ad doesn't mean you have to relate to them. It doesn't mean you have to be offended if the image is absurd and crazy. It doesn't mean, like, we kind of allow these random connections to make sense. And so we, with our projects, have been really interested in, like, putting faces of everyday people out in the public. This is at the Oakland airport. It's been there for the past 9 years. And that's what we hope I want to do. And I hope that other people do too. That, like, why don't we just use the medium we have to talk about whatever we want to talk about? Because otherwise we're just going to be listening to Fox News, and they're going to be talking about whatever they want to talk about. But on that note, thank you guys all for coming, and thanks for sharing your stories.
Who's mine?